The Holocaust in Austria was much different than other occupied countries, as Austria was ruled by fascists and Nazis before the Anschluss. In 1938, when Germany annexed Austria, the Jewish population in Austria totaled around 192,000 people, around 2% of the population. During the interwar, Austria was riddled to the core with anti-Semitism, and in 1922, anti-Semitism writer Hugo Reuter wrote a novel entitled The City Without Jews, aimed at Vienna, which would become a reality 20 years later. Of course, the Anschluss, which passed a referendum with 99.75% in support of the annexation, with 99.08% of the population voting, these are totally not tampered voting results. Overnight, anti-Semitic laws were imposed on the new German Ostmark territory, where 220,000 Jews were declared living in Austria overnight, a spike of 30,000 within mere hours. Forced reorganization of the Jewish communities were imposed almost instantaneously, and was led by Adolf Eichmann, while Jewish organizations and newspapers were shut down, and many Jewish people in high offices of any sort were arrested. Jews were banned from public transport, and unlike in other territories, the Austrians joined the Nazis in this campaign of anti-Semitism. This usually involved Jews being forced to wash sidewalks and public toilets, usually with their bare hands. A horrific incident, Jews were rounded up on the Sabbath and forced to eat grass at a popular amusement park in Vienna called the Prewar. All Jewish faculty members in the education sector were also dismissed and most imprisoned. During the infamous Kristallnacht, anti-Jewish pogroms were held throughout Germany and Austria, with synagogues being razed, Jewish shops looted and destroyed, and on August 8, 1938, the first Austrian concentration camp, the Mauthausen camp, was established. All assets of Jews, from houses to businesses to finances, were seized by Austrians. The Gestapo, the Regista, and the Dorothea auction house partnered together to loot, pillage, and resell Jewish property. The book VIII explains how hundreds of Jewish businesses were seized and never returned, even after the war. Earlier, in May of 1938, the Jewish community in Vienna was allowed to resume activities, and that involved trying to immigrate the Jews in Vienna. The Palestinian Bureau of the World Zionist Organization aided in the mass immigration, and was joined by the Central Office for Jewish Immigration, ultimately immigrating 126,000 Jews out of the country by the time Germany invaded Poland in September of 1939. In October of 1939, the deportation of Austrian Jews to Lublin in Poland began, and around 1,500 Jews were deported. In February of 1941, deportations to the Polish death camps began. In November of 1942, the Viennese Jewish community was liquidated. In this sense, the term liquidation means, well, exterminated. 60 to 65,000 Austrian Jews are said to have lost their lives. And when Austria was liberated in 1945, around 800 Jews remained. Never before had a genocide killed 99% of the population before. It's not just genocide, it was something far worse, something not even the English language has a word for. And to think, how even the local populations in Austria joined in this. And few other, but still other, occupied countries did that happen willingly. Pre-Munich Agreement Czechoslovakia accepted tons of German Jews that were fleeing the hands of the Nazis in 1933. However, this immigration crisis led to bills being passed in 1935 that made it where racial persecution was no longer a viable option for asylum seeking. In 1938, many Jews with Polish citizenship were expelled to Poland, but Polish police sent many back, and even some of them were left stranded on the border. After the Anschluss, the Jews fleeing Austria were denied asylum. In September of 1938, after the Munich Agreement, which gave Germany the Sudetenland, 200,000 people fled into central Czechoslovakia, including 27,000 Jews of the 30,000 living in the area. Czechoslovak authorities tried to prevent this mass exodus, but provisions in the Munich agreement allowed Jews in the area to retain their Czechoslovak citizenship. This led to a massive rise in anti-Semitism in the now handicapped Czechoslovak Republic. Speaking of, in December of 1938, the new ethno-nationalist Second Czechoslovak Republic announced their intent to solve the Jewish question. In January of 1939, all Jews living within Czechoslovakia who gained citizenship or residency after 1914 were ordered to be deported. Shortly thereafter, all Jews in civil office, the military, and Jewish teachers or Jewish businessmen were fired and their positions and items repossessed, and then they were banned from any travel abroad. This was done domestically, and was done without foreign coercion from Nazi Germany. On the 14th of March 1939, the independent Slovak state declared independence with the help of Czechoslovakia, and Germany invaded Czechia. Without Germany formally annexing Bohemia and Morava, Jews were allowed to travel again, and were forced out of the country by coercive immigration policies. On the 15th of March 1939, 118,000 Jews lived in Czechoslovakia. Well, at least in Bohemia and Morava, that is. When Czechoslovakia was annexed, anti-Semitic riots orchestrated by Czech citizens and Nazis alike led to multiple synagogues being razed to the ground in Olomouc, Veštin, and Moravska Ostrava. In Jihlava, Jews were barred from running cars and were forced to clear the roads with snow. Then the Gestapo came in and seized all Jewish organizations within Bohemia and Morava, and in the first week of the annexation, around 280 Jews committed suicide in Prague alone. Thousands were deported to concentration camps within Germany, and thousands of left-wing activists and German refugees were also arrested. In September of 1939, thousands more were arrested and used as hostages against the Polish government. Of the 8,000 or so arrested, Jews made up around 20% of the total. And something I am going to mention now, which is going to come quite a bit more, is that of the Jews who fled or deported, many were sent to Poland, or France, or Romania, nations that would ultimately be occupied or allied with Germany a couple years later. Imagine thinking you got out of hell, only for hell to follow you around, taunting you wherever you go, no place to run and few to hide. Fear, knowing that one day the Gestapo or SS would knock on your door or find your hiding place and strip you of your humanity, seemingly forever doomed to spend the remainder of your life in camps designed to kill. You can try and blot out the smoke of the ovens, which is simply just the smell of the remains of your dead peers. You can try and avoid the haunting scenes of the trains, piled with dead and alive alike, and all you have to do is live with it or die. The fact that so many, millions, had to put up with this is haunting. The pain so many felt, the fear, the horrors they saw. Never before in all the history of the world had genocide occurred on such a scale for the sole intent of mass murder and racial purification. Never before had millions been wiped off the continent, entire villages abandoned. This was a genocide, oh yes. This was senseless killing, brutal mass murder, butchery at its worst. All for senseless Lebensraum racial purification. All of it, every drop of blood, for some senseless superiority complex. I mentioned earlier, but not by name, but the concentration of Jews in the Lublin region was known as the Nisko Plan. During the execution of the plan, around 1,000 Jews and Czechs alike were deported, and after the plan was abandoned, they were left to their own devices. When Czechoslovakia fell, around 25,000 men and 24,000 women were of the working age. Unlike in other occupied nations, forced labor laws were executed by local governments. By 1942, 15,000 of those were of working age, nearly entirely men, were subjected to forced labor. In mid-1939, a proposal was made that would turn Bohemia and Morava Jew-free. Jews in Nemsky Brod, Flesmov, Klemens nad Nepal, Humoplek, Ledek Slava, and České Budějovice, among others, ended up being deported to Prague. By 1940, around 25 municipalities shoved any remaining Jews in factories and castles, locking them in. Along with this, deportation was common. In September of 1941, Hitler approved the deportation of around 60,000 Jews to the Lodz ghetto, and by that point, 80,000 Jews still lived in Bohemia and Morava. They would be forced to do forced labor until overpopulation in the Lodz ghetto led to the opening of the Kumlov extermination camp. Only around 250 of the 5,000 Jews deported to Lodz survived the war. From the transport to Minsk, around 750 of the deportees were murdered in a mass execution in July of 1942. Only 12 survived after the war. Following the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich on the 27th of May 1942, hundreds of people, especially Jews, were executed on accusations of sabotage, treason, and economic crimes. On the 10th of June, thousands of Jews were deported from Prague. Some were removed from the transport at Medjinek, and others were deported to the Yugoslavia near the Sorobir extermination camp. Only one man would survive that trip. On the 27th of October 1944, 18 leaders of the Prague Jewish community were deported directly to Auschwitz and murdered. All remaining Jews of the 60,000 ended up being deported to territories within Bohemia and Morava. The Therenstedt was their ultimate destination. Of the total 141,000 at Therenstedt, 74,000 were Czech Jews. 33,000 would die there, and even later, around 30,000 Jews from the camp in the rest of Czechia were sent to Auschwitz, with an additional 30,000 being sent to other camps. On March 9, 1944, in the single deadliest incident of Czech Jews, 7,000 were gassed in the chambers, and in July 1944, the camp was closed, with most of the prisoners being liquidated. Of the 118,000 Jews living in Czechoslovakia before its dissolvement, only 10,000 would return home. After Slovakia declared independence with German support in 1939, and all Jewish government officials were almost immediately fired. And in January of 1940, the Committee for the Solution of the Jewish Question was formed. Following the First Vienna Award, anti-Semitic riots broke out across the nation, as government labeled its number one issue the removal of all Jews in Slovakia, and in November, 8,000 Jews were deported. This was eventually cancelled, and many returned home to open tents. In 1940, 86,000 Jews lived in Slovakia, roughly 30% of the population. I want you to remember that number. Jews in the army were segregated into labor battalions that would serve as laborers on the fronts of war. Germany asked for the members of these battalions to be sent to Germany for labor usage. In Slovakia, unlike in Germany, Jews were declared by religion, not ancestry. This led to many Jews switching to Catholicism, which was a national religion. Strict rules were initially imposed upon Jews, such as barring them from major work, barring them from education, as well as road usage. In September of 1941, all Jews, who were now defined by ancestry, were forced to wear yellow armbands as well as other restrictions. Thankfully, through the asking of the Pope, any converts were barred from these restrictions. Now, this sounds light compared to Austria and Czechia, right? Well, now it's time to talk about the deportations of 1942. By late 41, high-ranking officials were aware of the Holocaust in Germany and the occupied powers, and Slovak soldiers reported mass killings on the front, and the deportations of earlier were known by many. In 1941, Germany demanded 20,000 workers from Slovakia for the war effort, and instead of offering non-Jewish Slovaks, 20,000 Slovak Jews were offered to Germany and their families. This led to the Lublin massacres, which involved the mass murder of deported Jews in Lublin in order to make room for more. Then, after negotiating a deal with Hitler, the worst part of the Slovak Holocaust was about to commence. In March of 1942, the first transit of 1,000 women made it to Auschwitz, and by the end of the first wave, 6,000 would be in its walls. Then came the families. Because neither Slovakia nor Germany wanted to deal with the Jewish families, 30,000 Jews, of whom are relatives of those already in Auschwitz, were sent directly to the Sobibor extermination camp. Of the 58,000 deported during the 1942 deportations, only 300 would survive the war. When Germany invaded Slovakia in 1945, additional roundups of imprisonments led to only 10,000 surviving within Slovakia, 86,000 to only 10,000, which is more than some other countries previously mentioned and yet to be mentioned. And to think, for those who returned home, the new communist Czechoslovak government suppressed mentions of the Holocaust up until 1989, when democracy was reimbased, and when most of those who survived would already be dead.